Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the System2 podcast. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Lee Brennan. He is calling in all the way from Australia. Lee is a carpenter by trade, but he's an artist, an interior guy, a construction guy, a maker. So it's really cool to have you on today, Lee. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, mate. Great to see you.
So, Lee, what's your
Yeah, like you said in that intro, there's a bunch of things going on. My story is a background from childhood. Basically, my dad was a fine artist, a realist, and I grew up, wanting to emulate him a lot, and painting and being around that world of art and surrounded by books and everything an artist has in their house to sort of inspire them, and that trickled down into I was always curious about all of that, and I loved the feeling of creating and painting and those sort of things. You get to your teenage years, and I sort of went and did other things and left that behind for a little while, and I was still really, really passionate about architecture and interiors. And, even through those teenage years, I was collecting all the magazines and books and surrounding myself with that kind of aesthetic. So from there, it sort of graduated into me trying to become an architect. I realized I didn't really have probably the mathematical skills it took to do get into the universities and be in that sort of like intellectual side of things. A great teacher I had that was trying to help us bridge through the mathematics to get into architecture said that, it'd really pay if you guys all, speaking to the class, it'd pay if you guys all did some actual building experience before you became an architect. And I thought that made a lot of sense. There's a lot of architects running around with great ideas, but sort of doesn't really, assist the process if you don't know how things go together very well, and how the construction side of things operates. So I went out and ended up trying to get some experience, but ended up with an apprenticeship, and then all of a sudden it was like this momentum, and you get sort of in a world, and 7 years went by, and I'd done my building certificate, and I was a licensed builder, and I was kind of entrenched in that construction world. It took me quite a while to realize how much I didn't enjoy that. I think it was just one of those things where you just immersed in it and trying to do the best you can, trying to impress as sort of like a 19, 20-year-old guy. And, you're amongst these sort of bigger, stronger guys that are more experienced, and you're trying to impress them, be a man and all of those things. And yeah, I got to a point where I just realized how much I'd had enough of that, and went traveling, and went and saw the world for a few years, and that was great. So that kind of gave me enough of a break from construction to, have the time to reassess where I was at, and what I really wanted to do. During that time, I did an interior design degree. I did some of that from home, and some while I was traveling, and that was sort of where my true passion lied. I think I always thought it was architecture, but it was actually more the interior side of things that was the interest to me. So, from there, was trying to figure out how to integrate my carpentry construction knowledge and skills, and merge that with that interior art sort of world, which is a little finer, a little softer, more about the details. And I think they ended up going hand in hand quite well. And I started making furniture and combining that furniture, like custom made furniture, to that interior design element with the construction side. It all sort of made a really nice package, and probably made things a little easier for clients because it eliminated maybe one or two pieces of the puzzle while you're trying to work through a project. I think sometimes less people involved in some of the decisions makes things a little more efficient. So having that combination has been really good. And, the last 15 years or so. I've just been working with my wife, and we've been working together, and we've got a studio here in Australia, and part of it's workshop, part of it's showroom, part of it's our office, and it's kind of our home base that we operate from. And we're just taking projects that really interest us and excite us, making furniture and making some jewelry as well in there amongst it all. Painting, done an art exhibition recently, and it's all kind of a world that we've created for ourselves, and we just include things that we're really passionate about.
How would you describe that world? What's your aesthetic? Or if your world was a movie, what kind of movie would it be?
Oh, a movie. Interesting question. The aesthetic of ours really stemmed from my love of using reclaimed materials. So, like we had a salvage yard really close to where I started this business. And I was just in love with using those pieces that had that age to them and had that character and had been through something before and had a past life. They just had so much more story to tell already before you even start working on them. So kind of made my life a lot easier to design around. And I'd go to the salvage yard and I'd basically design from the yard, just looking at the pieces that I could find, these beautiful old pieces of timber or deconstructed houses or barns or things like that. And that's where a lot of the ideas would come from. So, that kind of shaped our aesthetic in a way, because it gave us an identity around recycled and older materials. We kind of combined that with antiques. And my wife has a business in Indonesia, and we were traveling back and forwards from there a lot, and also other countries. But we were on our travels, we'd find beautiful things, and we'd put them in containers and send them back and put them in our showroom and style them around our furniture pieces as well. And it sort of like made its own aesthetic in a way, just through the passion we had for individual items. It's hard to say what you would call the style, but it's like there was a style around called rough luxury, I think, and I sort of always gravitated towards that because it is like on the masculine side, like a little bit heavier, a little bit sort of like bolder, but there is an element of luxury that I like to keep to it, and I think sometimes that contrast works well in the luxury homes to put something that does look a bit beaten up and aged. So I don't really have a name for it, but hopefully that gives you the idea.
I really like that description of the rough luxury. We can describe some of your jewelry. You make these really cool rings, and they're often made out of gold, but it's not what you'd typically expect out of a gold ring. So, can you describe what they look like, even the process through which you make them?
Yeah, the jewelry came in as a bit of a passion side project that I was just doing for my own artistic endeavor, just on the weekends and things like that. And then a few months went by, and I'd worked on it so much that I ended up with this collection of jewelry, and a great store that I was working with through the furniture side of things, they were a fashion store as well. And we went and showed them the collection, and they were really interested to put it on the floor, and it started to get momentum. And 10 years later, it's probably 50% of our business now is the jewelry. So yeah, it was it probably, the style came because I didn't have a clue what I was doing. It was just me basically making things in my workshop with the tools that I had to make furniture, and it was all very industrial, and there wasn't any kind of jewelry. There wasn't anything about it that resembled jewelry. It was very sculptural, and I'd start with like big chunks of metal, and I'd whittle them down and sculpt these things down into kind of a brutalist style of men's jewelry. And it was funny, like I always kind of thought it was designed towards men, but it started to become more popular for women. And they were, embracing some of the heavier, bigger pieces. And that was really cool. But the process is just so different to a standard jeweler. Like, I don't make molds, I don't cast, I don't really start from anything that's precious metal. It's usually like a big chunk of stainless steel or something like that. And I'll cut and carve and work with really industrial tools so that the finish of the pieces, it has a very unique quality because of the markings from those different tools and the process involved. And I think that's probably what set our jewelry aside from other artists, was just the fact that the process was so different. And we ended up taking that to Paris Fashion Week and doing some shows over there. You know, it went really well. The first couple of years, we engaged with a lot of interesting stores and some of the really big stores in Europe, and they were all curious about it, and they were willing to give it a try on on the floor. And it kind of like built the brand for us over there and some of the American stores too. And, you know, they're always looking for something kind of unique and original at those fashion weeks to bring to the table and bring to their clients. So, um, you know, quite quickly, we had about 30 stores that we were wholesaling to around the world with our jewelry. Um, it was a crazy time because I was still making everything, you know, and I still am, but it was everything, every item was made by me by hand, and without having molds and casts and things like that to sort of like mass produce from. I was just buried in, in production. Um, it was a crazy, probably 3 or 4 years of doing that, and then we decided to scale back with our wholesale accounts and just focus on some key stores that we really enjoyed working with, and our online store as well. So that's kind of where we're at now with it. And we've got our showroom here that people can come and try things on, and we've kind of like gravitated into this men's wedding market just by listening to the customers really and following what they wanted. So that's been an interesting little transition in the last couple of years too.
I want deeper into this part of your process where I'm thinking about the process. I think it starts off with your interests being so varied, and you decide you want to approach like you're a carpenter, architect, interior designer, furniture maker that then all of a sudden decides to make jewelry, and sounds like you didn't know too much, but you didn't even have the tools for jewelry, but that didn't stop you. You just go into your workshop and use the tools that you have to create these amazing pieces. It's almost like the interest led to you figuring it out using the materials and process that you had there, and then it came out looking great, and that became half of your business. So I'm curious about this, with sort of the courage to embark on a new, it's not even like I was gonna say like a new like line, but it's a completely new industry, right? Going from furniture to jewelry, and not let the fact that you had never made that before stop you from doing it. What's that been like?
Yeah, it's actually, maybe it's one of my strengths is I don't ever really consider or I never really worry about something not working out, you know, because maybe it's got something to do with having a trade as a background, and you always feel like you have that skill and it's there as a safety net. I'm not really sure why, but I I look at like some of the best Japanese artists and, you know, like these guys that really hone on one thing and they just keep honing and striving for perfection, and that's their, you know, they'll make one piece of sushi for 50 years. Like that has always been something I've been so curious about and sort of would love to be like that in a sense, but I'm completely the opposite. Like I'll bounce from making a piece of furniture to a piece of jewelry to doing a fit out in a restaurant to, you know, and even the materials when I'm making furniture is from concrete to steel to timber and anything in between. It's it's kind of like just this feeling of chasing aesthetics, really. Like it's not really about anything else than finding that final product, that finished piece, and it looking like the way that it looked in my head or the way it looked as I saw it through the process. But I kind of am in a rush to get to that finish point. It's more about making things that look beautiful, and it doesn't really concern me how that's done, whether it's a paint on a canvas or a dining table. Everything has an aesthetic to it and a ratio to it. It's all really, as unmathematical as I am, it does come down to maths and proportions and, the way things are put together and scale. And I think that might be the chase for me is just that final, beautiful, proportionally correct, color correct item that we've gone through the process and hopefully enjoyed the process, and then have that piece finished to be happy with.
Is that more of an emotion when you're looking at it and you know that the proportions are correct, or do you actually bring out your tape measure and you're calculating these ratios? Like how do you know that it's done and that it hits these ideal proportions?
Yeah, it's just 100% emotion. Like, how do you know when? And look, the proportions might not be, perfect for you or for anybody else, but so long as I'm satisfied with it, that's what I'm chasing. But like when you look at a painting, how do you know it's it's beautiful? Like it's all subjective, really, but it's just a feeling. It's hard to explain, but you just know when you know, and it's done.
I want to go back to the point you made about Japanese artists that are spending 50 years perfecting one piece of sushi. And you said that, and then you went right into saying, but that's not me because I'm interested in 100 different things. I
Yeah.
wonder why mentioned the Japanese artists as a starting point. Is that something you're striving for, but that's not you? Or do you think that you are who you are because part of you this level of perfection and focus? And because I'm trying to think about compared to somebody that is okay with being the person that's interested in 100 different things. They don't really want to focus on one thing, but it sounds like there's a bit of a conflict in you between this ideal version of a Japanese artist spending their life on one thing and your interests that are much more diverse. And if somehow the combination of those two things of that conflict leads to some of your artistic work.
Yeah. Now you're getting all Freudian on me. You're right. I'm definitely in contradiction, and I I want to be that sushi guy, 100%, because it kind of does drive me crazy having so many different things happening at the same time and the chaos of that. Like I really don't enjoy the chaos, and I don't enjoy having being spread all over the place so thin. And I think there's a part of me that really does strive to just zone in on something. I don't I think it's something in my nature that I just don't have the capacity to stay disciplined to one little process, though. It's more like that Renaissance world where you'd be covering sculpture and art and anything really. Those guys were making, what was Da Vinci doing? Flying machines and crazy experiments. Not that I'm comparing myself to him, but it's like that's probably more of my personality in that style of world. I do get envious of the sushi guy.
Speaking of Freud, let's go back to your childhood. You mentioned your dad was a fine artist. How were you as a child, and how much of who you became today is because your father wanted you to become an artist versus you were obviously like many children. We start off as artists and then we get that schooled out of us.
Mm.
What was it like to be the son of an artist? Were your artistic pursuits encouraged? Was there an expectation that you would follow in his footsteps?
Zero expectation, zero push in any direction from my parents. They were just happy to be a part of whatever I was up to, and it was definitely just a choice by me to sit next to dad and paint all day. Like I could have done that every day, all day. But he was a bricklayer as well, and we also had a cattle farm, and so he was just such a busy, physical person. And I think his if anything, as far as direction goes, he just didn't want me to become a bricklayer. It was his number one priority. But no, there was definitely no pressure there. And I think, with regards to the art, that it definitely shaped me coming from that background with dad, and still is because, I just did an exhibition with him as a it was called Bloodline, and it had a bit of a tale of, our trajectory together as artists, and that was just such a beautiful thing to come back all these years later and do something together like that. It's interesting to see how our styles have just gone in such different directions too, like he's such an amazing realist. Not always, like he's across all mediums and can do basically anything, but his realism is kind of what is known for, I would say. And I'm in this abstract expressionistic kind of world where our styles are so different. But I think also, that gap between what triggered this to resurge for me was having my daughter, and watching her with a paintbrush has just set me alight again. Like you were saying before about that artistic nature getting trained out of us. 100% agree with that. And watching her freedom with a paintbrush was just so inspiring, and it forced me to have to get back into it. I saw her and I thought, that's how it's done. Like that, we need to shut down. There's something external, whether it's our ego or what we're worried about other people thinking of our art, or there's some external pressure that's squashing our creativity into such a one-dimensional sort of form. And it's the people that are able to really let go that produce the most beautiful work. And obviously, that's children at the foundation. And some adults here and there can manage to get back to that, I think, but not many.
Maybe you should invite your daughter to be part of the Bloodline exhibition, have her paint some things and then show them alongside you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. That was in my head to get that done, but I think she's just a little young at the moment. I didn't want to put that pressure on her.
Well, speaking of pressure, you mentioned that your dad, there was no pressure on from him on you becoming an artist. Was there mentorship, or describe what it was like when you're painting next to someone who's a professional, especially a realist artist, where I'm sure that he could teach you a lot, or he had taught you things, versus like when my daughter is next to me trying to paint and I have no idea on how to guide her. What was it like to learn how it's not even learn, how to be a child messing around with some ink on the page and sitting next to someone who knew so much more about that?
Yeah. Well, I think, just now that you asked the question, I'm thinking about it. Maybe the most important part about it was seeing an adult that was producing art and making somewhat of a living out of it. That probably was, the biggest part of that relationship that I would have taken out of it, because it'd be, I imagine if you grew up without an artist in the house, then that would probably seem universes apart, from a day job. And how do you even begin? Where do you start? I think just having that in my life from an early age, I haven't thought about this till now. It probably gave me that sort of confidence that that was something that could be done as an adult. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was actually just yesterday at a library's table set up, and she went and sat down next to another kid who was drawing, and that kid's dad was also there just coloring a pumpkin. And I sat down and I made some kind of remark about, and he immediately started like, "Oh, I find this to be therapeutic," and it's at a point where if you're an adult that's doing that, it's seen as like childish. You have to excuse
Mm,
it that, oh, I find it relaxing to be coloring or drawing. And when did that, when did that start? Like when is it that we have to excuse ourselves from doing something that we clearly enjoy? Not to mention you're also doing an amazing activity with your kid, but there's this, I don't know, this like pressure, this self-consciousness as an adult who's doodling or drawing or coloring something, that it's somehow beneath us or somehow not good
mm.
at it. And I think that does go back to that being schooled out of us, where we now feel like we need to make an excuse for the fact that we're just sitting there and having fun with our kid drawing.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're right. It is like this feeling of guilt, almost like, oh, you know, everything's so fast paced and it's all about, making the money. And that's probably a waste of time if you're just spending your time painting. Like you should be doing something else it's more effective. I think it couldn't be further from the truth though. Like more people spent time immersed in that sort of meditative process of painting. I mean, only if they enjoy it, but I think people could get so much out of it if they gave themselves the time to do that. And it is so hard to make the time for it. That's a real guilty pleasure for me, even though I sell those artworks. It's like it took me a long time actually for the jewelry side of things because that was also a passion thing. And every time I'd make a ring or something, I'd be always in guilt mode because I knew there was a customer waiting for a piece of furniture, or there was a job I was working on or something like that. And to actually break myself from that to pursue this other direction, it probably took me 10 years to get out of guilt mode. Even when the jewelry was successfully making money and it was a huge part of our business, even now, swear to you, even now, there is an element of guilt when I'm doing that. And when I'm painting 100%, it's the weirdest thing. We might have spoken about this last time we talked, but it might stem from that construction background, I think, for me, because that was such like a hard world. You, you're expected to work from this time to this time and don't sit down and don't go off the rails. And if you're not in pain, you're not working hard enough, basically, is the theory behind it. And that's just this old school mentality of construction. And I was surrounded by those old school guys. And that after, those formative years of being around that for however long through an apprenticeship, it sort of fuses you in a way, like on a cellular level, I think, and then become like this frozen, piece of stone that all you know is pain is associated to hard work is associated to making a living. And that's, you know, the triangle. And, I'm still suffering from that. Even if I sell a painting for $10,000, I'll still suffer the guilt of making that painting because it's not hurting me and I'm enjoying it. Isn't that twisted?
What I find fascinating about this is that even as you're an artist and you feel this self-doubt when it comes to making arts, let alone those of us that are not artists and looking to do this. I feel like, I don't normally do this, but you're a very humble guy. You've been pretty successful. Like we got introduced by this big shot VC who works for the Bezos family. You've done projects for celebrities like Chris Hemsworth, and so you're someone that's in the grand scheme of things achieved a lot, and yet you still feel like you were saying that you need to prove something, you need permission. You feel it's like you're wasting time when you're painting something. And it's such a it's a fascinating question. I've run into this. I ran into this earlier today where I was talking to a one of my friends who is a special forces veteran, and he talked a lot like they're dealing with a lot of PTSD, and a big part of it is imposter syndrome, where they feel like they haven't done anything. In fact, it actually caused more harm in the world than good. And have achieved, have been at the top of their professions, have gone through Hell Week, have gone through these insane tests that most human beings would not have been able to get through. And you get to the other side and you have a long career and you still feel like you're an imposter. And so I think it's an interesting question about people that achieve. Is it, I don't know, does everyone feel that? Or is it even particularly for the highest achievers that they're somehow still not happy because they feel like they could be doing more that causes them to feel like they haven't actually achieved these things?
Yeah. Yeah. I understand that feeling. I'm really not sure. Maybe it's a good thing in a sense to keep us motivated. keep moving, keep the momentum. It's possible that that feeling creates people that achieve a lot because they are continually striving to beat the last thing they did, or advance themselves in some way. It's an interesting thing. I'm not so sure it's an imposter thing. It's maybe a little bit of that. It's just more the feeling of not being productive enough in that moment of what you're doing. So it's like this has the potential to not advance me or make money for my family, and that is a guaranteed production. Money works. Not that I'm at all obsessed with money, but you want to produce for your family and keep them living a nice life. So that's kind of where I come from with the money side of things. But I'm really just trying, in a perfect world, there would be just freedom and time to create. And that's all I really care about as far as work goes, is just having space to create without too much pressure, without too many time restraints and material restraints, and I know that's just asking for way too much, but there's always a deadline, and there's always like a financial crunch that needs to be discussed, and accounting and this and that. I often wonder how much that affects the creative process in the end. Sometimes maybe it affects it in a positive, like you could quite easily have no external pressures and you could waver along on some project or some piece of art forever and never really finish it because there was no deadline. So there's probably like a fine line between all of those things.
Yeah, I mean, you've going back to our previous conversation. It sounds like you've done some of your best work under constraints, like you're creating jewelry without jewelry equipment. That's a constraint. Then you're forced to do this, and it results in some really creative and interesting pieces. And so I think there's definitely there's a lot of like truth in that, whether it's deadlines or any other kind of artificial constraints, whether it's the tools you're using, the timelines, that ends up resulting in more creative pieces than you would have if you had unlimited time and resources.
Mm. I
Yeah,
think
and it's
it comes down to the entire problem is just in here. And I think, getting control of yourself and your mind has been one of my biggest challenges the last couple of years, and getting into things like meditation and just breathing and some different techniques to manage that can, in a way, slow the world down around you to a degree. I don't always, you know, I haven't mastered it, that's for sure, but it's helped a lot. And I think it's made me realize that the problems aren't out there; they're just in here. So managing that is number one, I think.
yeah, and it kind of goes back to, yeah, I don't know. Sometimes like the problems themselves result in some of the most creative work, where you have go through a breakup and you write this amazing song about it because you're feeling these intense emotions. And if everything was perfect, there'd be no country music if life was easy and perfect. Yeah, so I wonder how much of that is a reflection of not just your emotional state, the mental state, but also relationships. You talked about relationships with your father, relationships now with your daughter, and how that's changing the artwork that you're doing. So maybe we can touch a little bit on some of the points that I mentioned earlier. I think it'd be great if you want to just talk a little bit about some of the celebrity clients or the work that you guys have done, and how that, obviously, I'm assuming, has had an impact on the business side of it. What was it like on the personal or artistic side to get to a point where, quote unquote, like, made it, when you have these huge personalities that are buying, wearing, or displaying your pieces?
Yeah, it's exciting. I think that's the biggest thing to get out of it is like there's a feeling of achievement in a sense. It gives you a little bit of validation, I suppose, that what you're doing is working. Only for the reason I think that you're kind of dealing with people that can have anything they want. If they do select your work, then that is a big feather in your cap because, you know, they have the money and the contacts to basically have anything they want in their house, or wear anything they want. And to be chosen by somebody like that sort of, I guess, means that you've had some kind of impact on uh, style or a trend, or not that I hate trends, but maybe some kind of impression in the world of design to be in front of those people. And yeah, a lot of them, you develop great friendships with as well, and meet super interesting people through them, and become part of like really great networks of people as well. And that's one of the reasons I'm speaking to you is those networks that are created, and through the generosity of these people that have become so successful. I think they're always, well, at least in my experience and the people I've worked with, once you've sort of become part of that world, they're just so generous and sharing, and trying to help progress whatever you're doing, and especially with people like Chris, he's been so generous in sharing my work to his audience, and that's really helped progress things for us.
Tell me that story. How did you meet Chris? Like, what was the piece that to your point, I love the way you put it, is that they can wear or buy anything and they chose to buy yours. Tell us about that piece and how you guys met.
Yeah, I was working with another friend of mine who has Valley Eyewear, Michael, and we were doing some jewelry collaborations and a couple of different things. And he was wearing a lot of my jewelry, and Michael was friends with Chris, and I think they were out surfing together or something. And Chris saw one of my rings on Michael and said, well, "What's that?" And then Michael made the introduction to Chris, and Chris wanted to do a renovation on his house. He'd bought an old place in Byron Bay, and he wanted to renovate the whole thing. So we wanted to have a chat about that, and we went up to the house and had a few beers and some conversations and got along really well. And then it just kind of carried on from there. And then he decided to not get rid of that old house and build something new. And in between that time, we were making a lot of jewelry together and doing little, whatever he wanted, basically, like furniture pieces and all kinds of things. And then he built this beautiful home, and we were a part of the process of doing some work on the house and some great items in the house. And over the last probably 10 years, we've become good mates and spent time together. And it got to a point where it wasn't so much work. It was just easy, hey, I need a piece for behind the couch. What do you think? And it wasn't, it was very much more casual, and just became a good relationship. And that's how we sort of kicked it off. And Chris came up to the shop here, and spent some time up here, and just, I think he just had a gravitation towards our aesthetic. And I guess it must feel nice when you find somebody like that, if you find a good clothing brand that fits well, and you love it. I personally tend to just stick with that brand. I'll buy 10 of those t-shirts and I'll just wear them to death. So maybe it was something like that. You can trust a person, they've got the style you're looking for, they've got the taste you're looking for. It makes his life a lot easier because he doesn't have to, he's such a busy person. It's a one-stop place, and you can pick up the phone and get what you need, in a sense. And maybe, people that have so much on in their life, finding those little keys to the matrix is probably like one of the great things for them, I guess.
That's yeah, it's amazing. And it's I think on one hand, having from Chris's perspective, having that level of obviously trust, but also customization where he can just say, yeah, I need something for behind the couch. And you already know the room. You have all this context, and you can actually create something for that room. He doesn't need to explain it to you in many words, is something that we've definitely lost in today's mass market world. And this used to be the relationship you had with the different trades that you'd rely on for anything in your life. And I think so that's, on one hand, it's cool to see that. I can get it, I can understand like how he's benefiting from this. But at the same time, it's cool to see how you guys, like, yeah, developed a friendship. And you hear a lot about celebrities or influencers that end up partnering with a brand or even becoming an investor or a co-founder of these brands, but it's much more transactional, and you can tell
Mm.
that their heart's not really behind that product or business. Versus when he's like, I could see a world where if I wanted Chris to come and join me in something I'm doing, and he'd say yes, and it'd be like all sorts of financial incentives, and yet he would not want to have a beer with me because it's not that vibe. Whereas with you, like, you guys have developed this relationship which goes, yeah, way beyond what you'd normally expect to see if there was a celebrity partnering with a business. And I think that's yeah, I don't know, it's just like a testament to how this can be done at a human level if you take
Mm.
out all the buzzy business trends and, like, oh, the Harvard Business School top 10 things you need to do as a consumer company to get into whatever. And if you, yeah, talk to our buddy Saul, who has a lot of experience with this, and think about, yeah, what does it take for consumer companies to grow? And yeah, there's that textbook example of the strategy behind it, but at the same time, what's lost is this human connection where it's like, no, we actually just do right by people, have beers with them, and the business just naturally flows from that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think we might be getting back towards that a little bit. Like you can just smell now anything transactional, and everybody's so much more savvy now around social media and advertising and marketing and things like that. I don't know. I think everybody's kind of like veering away from the polished, obvious collaborations that are just like, okay, I'll pay you this, you do this photo shoot, and that's that. I don't know if 100%, but I just feel it in my bones that I think that you can see the way that media is shifting, and it's more towards that live streaming, sort of like behind the scenes, people sort of like chatting directly to the artist or the maker, or there's more access to direct to the source rather than like the celebrity sort of branding. It's an interesting direction everything's going in, and people seem to just be craving more like, I mean, I guess it's been happening for a long time since the Paris Hilton days of the reality TV, but it it's definitely amplified now, and the access is there. I mean, you can basically DM anybody, and you can try. You've got a better chance now of contacting somebody that is influential than you did 10 years ago.
Well, on that point, we talked a lot about you as an artist, but you're also a business person. And there's some tension there because you talked about how you hand make a lot of your pieces, if not all of your pieces. And at the same time, wanting to scale and be able to grow the business to the next level. How do you think about that conflict from wanting the business to scale, but at the same time, there's something inauthentic when you go from hand making everything bespoke for that one person's couch to
Mm.
saying, no, this piece can be in everybody's living rooms, and I now have the factories in Asia that can manufacture it for you. How do you think about those two sides of your life?
It's probably my number one challenge, and I think you have to make a choice. I don't know that there can be any in between. I've sort of tried to a degree to let my hands off the wheel a little bit, and there is definitely a loss of the outcome, in my mind anyway. And I think the customers would feel it too. I think there probably is a way to do it. I don't know 100%, and I think, that's where our conversations started. I'm looking for those answers in a way, because you're so right. And I think it's a very common theme with small business people, or producers and artists and manufacturers. Finding that sweet spot has been a goal for me the last few years, where I can spend more time with the family, travel more, but still have the output from the business and not have to be here physically on the tools every single day. It's been interesting with this interior job. It's a bigger scale commercial job that we're working on. I've, in a sense, been forced to take my hands off the wheel and surrender. to a lot of it because I just cannot physically cover all the ground that needs to be covered. And right now, as we speak, there's 100 guys on site making decisions that I wish I was there helping with. And it gives me the worst anxiety because I know there'll be things getting done that I wouldn't agree with. And I'd love to be micromanaging every little decision, but it's a steamroller and there's just no way to slow it down at the moment. So that's been probably a really good thing for me to just be forced. And that feeling of surrender is an interesting one because, like we were talking about with the meditation and things like that before, that's a common thing that comes up is just surrender to what's happening in the moment. And every time I do more of that, better outcome arrives. It's fascinating how it works. Every time I get tighter and tighter and try to hold on as tight as I can, the worse the outcome. And I'm slowly starting to realize that. And I'm getting better, I think, at sort of letting go. And it's such an interesting phenomena that happens. And I'm realizing that I don't know everything and I'm not always right. And my choice may not be the best choice in the moment because I'm starting to see things happen that are really pleasant surprises and things that I would have never thought of that I love. It's all of a sudden opened up to this new world. Like maybe there is a possibility to not micromanage every little moment of the day and choice that's made in the design side of things. And you can come up with a broad concept and hand that over and just see what happens, enjoy seeing what happens more than stressing about the outcome not being exactly what you thought. So people have done it over and over and over. I mean, at all the big brands, they hand the keys over to a designer every second year or, and they all seem to survive through it. And you look at the Gucci's and all of the luxury labels and they plow through different designers and somebody takes the reins and does the micromanaging, but also that's been handed to them from the higher powers above. And at some point, somebody did take their hands off the reins and everything's okay. Things continue on. So maybe that's all up here again as well, mate. It's something that needs to be conquered mentally.
And that draws me back to when we were talking about children and the relationship between parents and kids, and how on one level, yeah, there's that element of control and you want them, you've made all these mistakes before. You know what the right answer is. Why wait for your kid to make that mistake versus letting them discover it for themselves? And I'm curious how you talked a lot, didn't put pressure on you, but at the same time was a mentor in some ways. And now that you have a daughter, how you're thinking about kids and in this context of like micromanaging versus letting her explore
Mm.
and what we might be able to learn from that.
Yeah, that's a good connection. Well, there it is. You said it right there. It's important. Like for growth, it's an important thing to let go. You've just taught me a great lesson. I didn't ever make that connection to children and, us as adults surrendering to some of those things. But growth obviously happens somewhere where there is surrender because there is something happening greater than us that's driving everything anyway. An outcome will happen whether we like it or not. Maybe less control is the answer. Might be the actual answer.
Yeah, and I struggle with that myself. Yeah, I had a conversation today about how my obsession with control cost me some things on the personal side and friendship side. And yeah, it's hard to, even though you might realize you're doing the moment, it's hard to take a step back from that. And also, thinking about what you were saying earlier, the how you feel when you're embarking on something new and it feels like it's a waste of time when you know you could be playing it safe and building the thing that you know is going to sell. And that conflict between doing the same old, the thing that you know works, versus taking a leap into the unknown and trying to be creative when odds are it's not going to pay off, but maybe it will. And that's sort of the frontier of innovation,
Mm.
where yes, it applies to everything, not just art. I think from my standpoint, thinking of it from a business context, where it's much safer to do the thing that's been working versus experimenting with something else when you feel like it's a waste of time. You might hear your partners or others being like, why are you wasting your time on this when we could be focusing on this other thing? And they're probably right. 9 times out of 10, or
Mm.
when this play led to something completely novel, and it's the thing that you need to keep the business growing. But there's something really interesting about that tension, because in the moment it does feel like you're wasting time and resourcing, and you should be focusing on the thing that pays off.
It's a fascinating thing, isn't it? And trying to come to grips with that and learn your own mental state around that's probably the beginning of fixing it, but also like how it's connected to growing as a business. I've never really had any staff, like I've got a guy that's Hayden that's helping me now in the workshop, and it does really relieve a lot of pressure. But at the same time, I don't know where the sweet spot is with the amount of people to have, because like you were saying, when you want to work on fresh ideas and be creative and have space to like think for yourself and evolve ideas, there needs to be a lot of time around that. And then I see businesses that have like, 10 or more staff. And I just wonder how that works. It must be a management implementation or something like that to give the director the space to create and come up with new concepts for the business, or just follow passions that bleed into the business. I don't know how many people I would need to get to that place where you're not just sort of like managing what everybody else is doing from day to day. I guess that's just a hiring skill and getting the right people involved. I've never
Yeah.
really gone down that path far enough.
And yeah, if anyone listening to this has thoughts for Lee, it'd be great to hear them. I think my take is that it's the grass is greener on the other side, right? We're now a 40-person company. I remember when we first started, it was two of us, and we hired our first employee because we wanted someone junior to take stuff off our plate. Then you hire somebody else, and you hire somebody else. And the reality for me has been that we haven't gotten there. No matter how big the company is, and you're 10 people, like, oh, great, 10 people must be phenomenal. And you're 20 people. Next thing you know, like, we were 20 people, like, I don't know, a year ago. And we've now doubled that. And it still doesn't feel like, yes, it's sort of a bunch of things have gotten easier, but it still is not, like, hasn't solved that problem. In fact, to your point, it causes other things, because you now need to manage people. And the more people you have, the more management you need. And the interesting thing for me about being at a startup is that you never know what you're doing. It's
Mm.
like no matter how much you're growing, that's the first time you've been at a company that size. And so
Mm.
every day you show up and you're like, I don't know a company. I don't know how to run a 10-person company. I now don't know how to run a 40-person company. My wife's company's got 100 people, and
Right.
she feels the same way. And yeah, like when we talk to the people that are very large enterprises where you feel like they've figured out all their shit, and there's still something like, yes, you learn lessons along the way. And yes, I know a lot more now than I did when I started, but I still feel like nowhere near that goalpost keeps getting pushed further and further out. And I think it's interesting to, one of the things that I loved about these conversations is that before this conversation, I assumed that artists have figured it out. And like, yes, there's that, the figuring out like the money making side of making art, but like in terms of that playfulness, that ability to create, like the whole thing, when I think about creativity, I think of artists. And yet to hear you talk about the challenges when it comes to creativity as an artist, and that sort of like, I don't know what it is, that it pulls us back into that safe space versus like innovating. It makes me think that this is just part of the human condition, that
Yeah.
we're doomed to strive for like that, having the time, the money, thing to be able to like focus on the things that I really want, and yet it's doesn't seem to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost like I've spoken to a lot of friends that have been through all of that and successful, and, a lot of people working for them, and, they've made good money and everything, but they always tell me the same thing. And they always say, stay small, stay small. And they've kind of burned it into my brain so much that I think this is the right way to be. I still, it still makes you think though, that you want to try it. It's like, I just want to feel what 10 stuff would be like. Would that work for me? And it's one of those things as humans in our condition that you just want to know for yourself before you make that choice. Do you know what I mean? It's like this
Absolutely, and
temptation.
yeah, there's nothing that anyone could say to convince you otherwise. Like you can just tell that's built in you, and you're gonna strive to achieve that. And yeah, I do wonder if this is one of the common traits of people who end up succeeding, is that they just can't help themselves. Like they know that the thing they're after is not real. It's a mirage. You're never gonna get to that goal. But I don't care. I want to get to 10. When you
Yeah.
get to 10, it's like they still have this void in my soul. So maybe 20 is gonna fix it. And yeah, next thing you know, you spend your whole life trying to fill it. I'd be curious if your friend, Chris Hemsworth, is how he feels about his achievements. Next time you guys have a beer, maybe you can ask him. I think that's it's really fascinating, right? To see someone, people that have achieved so many things. Like, is it
Yeah.
enough? Is
Yeah.
like, being Thor in the Marvel universe is like the peak of blockbuster movies. Like, is he there, or does he still feel like no, no, no? I'm still not where I am.
Yeah, that's right. No, I guarantee he's still striving for the next thing. I know Chris, and he's so, he's got such an energy of what's next, what's next. It's fascinating to watch. And he said to me once, actually, we were just talking about life and, what's next and success and things like that. And it was funny because he was like, kids are the great leveler. He's like, it doesn't matter if you've got $100 billion in the bank. And, he's got 3 kids. They keep him so grounded because you still have the same challenges as everybody else that has kids. They just have this ability to level the field, and you're worried about the same things and the same constraints and all of those things. Obviously, there's luxury things that can get done, and you can get a lot of help if you do have the money. But it was an interesting comment that he made, and I was like, yeah, that's very true. Like the unhappiness of your child is the number one, or the happiness of your child. I mean, if one of them or more are unhappy, then that is your baseline, right? That's your biggest concern in life at the time, and that brings you right back to everybody else's level. So that was pretty interesting. But it's kind of the same with business, I guess. You see the huge companies that are doing hundreds of millions of dollars, and the little guy like me that's not. And we're talking about similar things, really.
Yeah, no, for sure. Because I mean, the goalposts keep moving. It's like, 100 million sounds great until you then start hanging out with a bunch of billionaires, and you're like, well, I'm nothing. And then you meet people that have like a billion, and you're like, wait, 20 billion? How come like that? It's just this is the fascinating thing about the human condition, is that I love your point about kids being the great equalizer. Is that kids will see past your bullshit, and like there's very little that you can do to be cool to them, or at least that like the things that we think are going to make us look cool in our kids' eyes. Like if I was Chris Hemsworth, I'm pretty like I would think that my kid would think I'm the most amazing human being on the planet because I'm Thor in movies. And the fact
Mm.
that his kids like don't care about that, and he's just like dad to them, is so telling about how. And then at the same time, that's not to mean that you're not the hero in your kids' eyes. And it's not that kids don't look at like us, like what we view as the great achievements that we think are gonna impress them, when all they want is to just hang out with us.
They just
And
want the attention.
yeah, like I've been asking everyone I'm meeting about parenting. You and I have talked about this too, and I think the best piece of parenting advice that I've gotten tons, and a lot of it is like it's great. Like everyone's got their own takes on this, and it's about how, one of my favorite ones is about spending one-on-one time with your kids and making sure you're paying attention to them. And there's tons of others. But the best piece of advice was I was recently on an airplane sitting next to a grandma who was going back home after visiting with her grandkids, and we're chatting, and I asked her that question about what parenting advice do you have, and she stops and thinks for way too long, like grandmas do, thinking that she forgot the question, and then she just looks at me and says, "Just love them."
Mm.
And that like really hit me because I was like, holy shit, like you're trying to like to get this whatever like self-help book about what's the secret to parenting, what's the secret to all this. And she's like, just love them. Time
Yeah.
is gonna go by so fast, and that's all you can do.
Yeah.
And it's yeah, it really, I don't know, it really, really resonated. And it's often this whole like rat race that we're on trying to figure out how to get more. And maybe that's not the question that we should be asking.
100%. And it's all, everything we've spoken about is the same thing. It's just, removing the ego really and finding that inner peace. You could think about money and think about business and all of these things. And it is, like you said, a mirage. The whole thing's a mirage. It's all just waiting at home for us. That's everything.
Yeah. And yet we can't help ourselves.
And we can't help ourselves.
This is a great, great conversation. And yet I'm going to go back and do a bunch more podcast episodes because, we got to keep building when it's like, this is the kind of stuff that should be enough. Like this could be a great ending to my podcasting career. And yet there's something in you that just wants to do just one more. Like, let's see where else we can take this.
And through the middle of this this fit out project, there's been moments where I said to my wife, we're working together and we're stressing, and I said, "This is the last one. This is the last one," and that lasts for about 10 minutes, and you're already thinking about the next one. And coming to work this morning and coming to chat with you, and my daughter was they know the energy. Know when you're leaving. They play the game, and she wanted to just play with me, and she had all her toys, and "Daddy, please just play with me. Please play with me." And she knew that I had to get out of the door, and trying to tear myself away and say no for that. And I was looking at her and I'm thinking, what are my priorities? Like, what am I doing? Why am I tearing myself away from here? It just felt so wrong on a cellular level. Not that I didn't want to talk to you, but just I would have been coming to work anyway. But it's like, that intuition, I think more when everything inside you says don't leave, maybe that's the right choice.
Well, Lee, I think this is the perfect ending to this conversation where we should just go hang out with our kids.
Yeah, I think
And
so, mate.
leave the work for another day. Well, yeah, Lee, this is amazing. Thank you so much for speaking with me today. And yeah, I had a blast.
Thank you very much, mate. I really appreciate it. Great to chat.